All right, kiddies, let's get rolling here. On this demo, we are going to discuss how to lay out a business card. So, if we think about business cards for a moment, of all the different elements that we have in paper right now, business cards are probably the one thing that is going to stick around. When we are slapping palms with people at conventions and at trade shows, at user group meetings, or people coming to visit you, you going to visit people, interviews, and so on, that business card is going to be that piece of paper that you're going to give to somebody. And even though I may scan it in on my iPhone and put it into my business card file, I still need that business card to scan in, right? And there are people who still keep business card files. And so in the end, I think the business card is going to have a shelf life of quite a while. So we're going to start with the business card. It'll drive the design for all of the other elements in our stationery package. So what I've done here on the screen is I have basically assembled all of the different parts of the business card. We have a logo, and you will have finished your logo design by now, and you will begin to apply it to this to the stationery or identity package, it's sometimes called. And then, of course, you'll have your name, and you will have your title. The address is something that I want to talk a little bit about. On a business card, you want to be careful with addresses, only because you don't know, really who's getting that business card. And if you put your personal address on it, not being paranoid or anything, but you might be opening up yourself to, some possible, issues, if you will. So I suggest possibly putting your a business address on it or a post office box, and absent those two things, probably don't put an address on it. In general, people will be communicating with you via email or phone, or by some contact information on your website. So those are the three elements that are probably more important than the address. But in the interest of, saying, yeah, you have a business address and you might want people to know where it's at, then I think that's probably a good idea to keep that address on there. If you do business out of your home, you have an office in the home kind of thing, and you meet with clients at your place of business, then, you need to decide in your own mind whether you feel safe about putting your home address on there or not. Okay, that being said, so what I've done here is I've assembled all the elements. Okay, so that's what you want to do getting started. Your business card is going to be 2 inches tall by 3.5 inches in width. On the website, you'll see that I have the specs in the identity package specifications discussion within the project category. Okay, so anyway, before you begin, when you want to set up your new document, you want to set the resolution to 150 pixels per inch. And the reason why is because when we begin to print these, you need to have a resolution high enough that a laser printer will be able to render it without causing any issues. So 72 pixels per inch will usually turn out pixelated. You will end up with, rasterized edges around your text. Your graphic may look a little bit ratty and so on. So setting it at 150 will allow the laser printer to print the document properly. It's not a great idea to print out of Fireworks. It's not really a print program. It's better if you are using Fireworks, and that's the program you've been using throughout, and you don't know Illustrator or InDesign, you'll want to export these files or simply open them in either Illustrator or in InDesign, and then print from there, because you have CMYK and RGB color modes. CMYK briefly, which I discussed in the color project way back in Project 4, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, which is the typical 4-color process that laser printers and also offset lithography uses. Okay, so anyway, 150 pixels per inch. All right, and then do I really care about that? I don't care about that. So anyhow, all right. So business card, 3.5 inches in width by 2 inches in height. Now, business cards can also be tilted on the long side, so that is an option for you. You don't have to have it in the horizontal format. It can be vertical, and I would suggest exploring that option as well. Okay, pixels 525 by 300. Okay, so there are your specifications. So now we're getting back to our business card. Notice in my layers, I've set my layers up so that each layer has a specific amount of information on it. And this will allow me to manipulate elements without messing around with other elements. Like, say, for example, I get my logo in the right place, I can just lock that down, and then that logo can't be moved, okay? If I lock down my border, which is my one outside perimeter here, then I can do a select all, for example, and nothing moves, right? So using the lock feature on layers and organizing your project in such a way that the layers make sense, you can then manipulate your elements more carefully. Something else you can even do, and we haven't really discussed layers that much, but say in the logo layer, right? When I click on the logo, I get everything, right? It's unlocked, obviously. But if I flip this down, I can lock certain parts of this. So say, for example, I wanted to lock this thing down. I could lock, by shift clicking, I can lock down different elements and then lock each element down individually. So that's another option you have to be able to manipulate some things versus others. But this being said, ideally we will have already approved the logo, and we're not going to be messing with it anymore. We'll have worked through the typography, we've worked through the graphic elements, and we will be fine with it. Okay, so you don't really want to mess with it after that. Okay, so I'm going to basically shut that logo layer down, and I'm going to lock it down. Okay, that way it won't get messed up. I have my border, and the reason why I have a larger frame is partly because I want to see the stuff that I am going to be working with before it gets into the format. And if you are in Fireworks, your artboard is as big as your visible area. So if I move something out of the artboard, then I can no longer see it. So that's why I have a slightly larger artboard. Okay. So I'm going to lock down my border, which is set at 3.5 by 2. And you'll see here I set up a document, and I'm going to eventually paste everything into that. Okay. So you can see in the Modify menu under Canvas, I can check what my settings are, and you'll see that my print size is 3.5 by 2, and my resolution is set at 150, and there's my pixel resolution. Okay, so when I paste everything from my bigger document into this document, it will fit perfectly, and then I would be able to say format this and send it off to a printer, but we can discuss that when we get to the actual printing production part of it. Okay. So, business card. So at the moment, like I said, I've put all my content on the page, and the first thing I want to do is I want to first lock down the text because I don't care about it right now, and I want to experiment with where the logo is going to go. So if I just click on the logo, I'll get everything. A good idea at this point in the game is to group it. Okay, so modify group, and that way, no matter what I do, I won't mess up the logo. It's always going to be one object, and I can move it around, scale it, do whatever I want to do. Okay, so my feeling is that you put the logo in first, okay, and then you explore where that goes and how large it is. So we have a couple of options here. In this particular logo, the logo itself is got a crop on it, right, because the pencil looks like it's coming out of space. And we've got some very strong perimeters. So when I talk about layout, I want to think about those perimeters for a moment. So I'm going to basically scale this down. I think it's a little bit too large for a business card. And using the scale tool, I can do that. And then, I might want to explore moving it around a little bit and sort of seeing where it fits. And I'm going to sort of nestle it comfortably in the lower left corner for starters. And it's actually, I think, easier to move it around using the pointer tool versus the scale tool. I mean, you can sort of dynamically see it move and sort of say, well, gee, maybe it would go here or maybe it would go here. But in the interest of the fact that it's got that pencil, let's first bleed it off the edge and see what happens, okay? So the next thing is looking at the different places where I can align things. And these are what's known as internal alignments, or sometimes called in an intuitive grid. Okay, so in the view menu, we can have guides and rulers and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show my rulers. And what that allows me to do is to pull out guides by clicking on the ruler and then dragging out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, all these guys are still there, whoops. So anyway, let's pretend I just dragged that out, okay. And what I do is I put a perimeter around the object first. So anything that's got a good, strong alignment opportunity is where I put these lines, all right. So there's other opportunities, for example, the baseline of McMurray and our fictitious person, Mary McMurray. She's an illustrator, okay? And so what I'm doing here is I'm using the most dominant element, which is the logo, and I'm using that as a guide to begin to lay out the rest of my design. I have the text all set in Arial, okay, and our logo itself uses Arial Black as our font. So now that I've got the logo sort of set up and I've got the guides, I might want to go into View Guides and then lock them down, okay. So, and you might also remember what these commands are. Show Guides is splat semicolon, and lock guides is option splat semicolon, okay? So what this allow me to do is I can show the guides, hide the guides, hide, show, and I can also lock or unlock them, okay? So at the moment then, the guides are locked. I can't move them, okay? And I can see them. So I think it's a good idea to just explore those tools and get used to using them, all right? So the first thing then I would do, or the next thing I should say, would be I would lock my logo down and unlock my text. And then I'm going to start playing around. Now, the first thing I would look at, this is something that I personally like to do, is to look at fonts and pick fonts, and that way I get a feeling for what things might actually look like. And so in the interest of speed, and we've been, through the font explorations in the previous project where you put the word down and then you duplicate it a bunch of times and then you explore different fonts by replacing the font in each one and then picking the one you like. So let's say I've already been through that process, okay? So now I'm going to go to a font, one of my standard fonts that I just happen to like. I happen to love actually is Gaudi Old Style. It's a really nice, elegant font. It's got nice contrast between the thin and the thick parts of the elements. It has, let's just take a look at this really big for a moment. What we can see is it's a pretty classy font. Let me drag this down here so you can see it. It's a pretty classy font. And it has, like I said, a nice contrast between the thick and the thin. It has nice, elegant serifs, a nice, comfortable lowercase x height to the uppercase x height. So it's a neat, clean font. So I could then scale this or I can change the font size. Notice that my font size changes here, or I can play with it here. It's actually a better idea to use the font size control rather than the scale control. I want you to start getting used to what point sizes look like. It's an important element in graphic design, saying it's going to be 28 point, 32 point, something like that, versus just scaling things indiscriminately. So it's a good idea to get used to that. Something else that I'm noticing here as I start to play with this is that there's another alignment opportunity here, and that is right here at the end of McMurray. So these are all possibilities. This particular guide here, I just put this here because I am looking for a right hand perimeter to my design. And at first I would use the distance of the logo to the edge on the left, and I would more or less imitate that. Now, because we've got a very strong element on the left, it might make sense to use a right hand alignment. Okay, so these are things that we're going to work with in the next exercise, but for now this is a warm-up, right? So I'm going to use our flushed right alignment, and what happens here is I have what's known as an organic edge around this shape. Okay, now if there was no pencil and no name and it was just the M, it would be a geometric edge. But because it has these elements and it has this sort of floating characteristic, it's intruding into the space toward the right. And so rather than making that something where I'd have to say, make this all flush left, for example, let's make that flush left. Okay. Doing something like that, it might make more sense to allow the negative space that flows around this graphic and let that do its thing. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lock my guides back down again because I don't want them to move. And I'm going to make this text flush right. And you notice as I play with the text right, I got the alignment options here. And we talked about that on the last project a little bit, but we're going to use it a lot more here. So what I'm doing now is I'm using the baseline of the M to align my text here. I might even do this. However, I end up with this rather underutilized negative space. So I'm going to use, and I might even drop this down into that space a little bit. Okay, so what you're trying to do here is you're trying to find kind of the magical balance in terms of where things go. Remember, we talked about gravity in the last project. Every element's got gravity, and at a certain point it will attract it, and as it starts to move away, the attraction becomes less and less to the point where it no longer sticks, and the other object will start to just sort of float, right? So what you're looking for is a relationship that's comfortable. You don't want it to be like tucked in there so tight that you don't have any space, but you also want it to have a relationship. I would say right here is about as far away as it could get before it starts to, lose the attraction of gravity. Now, looking at the rest of the text, I set it all in Arial because that's one of the default fonts. Personally, I don't find Arial to be an exciting font except in certain kinds of situations. We'll get into that a little bit more in the next exercise, but for now, we're looking for something that's got more character, right? We want something that's got a little bit of, personality to it. And Mary's kind of a classy person. She's an illustrator. And so I would, generally speaking, select all of these and just make them all Gaudi for starters, okay? And that way I've got some continuity. And then I'm going to drag in the address and put it somewhere. And it might even be where the address is the least important thing. We might want the most important information. And look at that. That sort of fits really nicely right in there. I didn't even plan that, but sometimes these things happen. I might go, God, that's kind of cool. I think I'll just leave that there. And phone number is important. Address is important, but not as important. Okay? So what I've just done here, and let me turn off my guides here and sort of see, because the guides will influence how things look. So make sure you turn them off from time to time. Now, as I'm looking at this, even though the alignment looks good, I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit and just sort of see. Yeah, it actually is pretty tight. Interesting. Okay, then I'm just going to go back to real size, 100%, and turn off my guides again. Oh, wrong tool. Sorry. Yeah, okay, got it. Sorry. All right. As I look at it, it doesn't look quite right, does it? This feels like it's not quite aligned properly. And part of the reason is because the baseline, the top of the X height of the lower case is much stronger than the top line of the caps, right? So in reality, we might look at this and say, maybe that's a stronger alignment, in which case my little magical alignment no longer works. Personally, I feel like it's important to have the most amount of flexibility. At the moment, I've got these two pieces of text in one text box. That's not the most versatile way of doing it. So what I'm going to do is I am going to lock my guides back down and turn them off. And I'm going to duplicate this. And one of these is going to become the email. And one of them is going to become the website. Okay, we're good. Okay, so now I've got a little more flexibility. I have a little period there. I missed that. Okay, there we go. Okay, turn our guides back on. And then let's see what happens. You can use your arrow keys to nudge things around. You're going, why is he being so picky? And the reason I'm being picky is because it's important. And so now I would start playing around. I've got all my elements in place. And I'd start looking at my little grid that I've set up. And I'd start pushing things around. And I'm liking this. Turn off the grid, sort of see where we're at. It's kind of working, right? Everything feels like it's kind of lining up. Everything looks a little organized. So then I look at this and I go, Why do I go, Well, this is the important part of my graphic, right? Really the most important thing, because it's my name and it's what I do. And so it's important. I'm going to change that to illustration. It sounds a little more, kind of more professional. Illustrator sounds a little personal, So now I got that. And it still feels like it's floating a little bit. So I might think about putting in something that locks it down a little bit, something that helps it to, hold its act together, if you will. And so I'm going to make a graphic element. And a graphic element is simply something that provides a guide that allows the eye to be drawn to something or from one place to another. So there's my little graphic. I'm going to turn my guides on for a moment. And because I've got this alignment over here, notice I didn't put, let me zoom in on that for a moment. Notice that I didn't make that line right on the edge of the Y. And you ask why. And the reason why is because the Y in and of itself is not a very strong element. It doesn't have a very strong alignment opportunity, right? It comes to a point. And because it comes to a point, it doesn't, I'm trying to get that line right to the top. There we go. It doesn't have a good strong sense of identity on that side. It's not like the edge of the M or an edge of the Y or another edge. Elements have stronger or weaker ones, like the A, rather weak, right? The C, very weak. So rounded elements or pointed elements don't have good, strong opportunities for alignment. So optically, it's best if you sort of offset that a little bit. If it's right here, I mean, it can work. Basically what I'm saying is it has to look right. It doesn't matter whether it's mathematically correct or not. If it looks wrong, it is wrong. Okay? So what I'm doing here now is I'm actually going in and I'm tightening up all of my guides so that they really are where they should be, because it's important. These little teeny things, this is what's known as craftsmanship. And craftsmanship is something that can make a design look really professional or can make it look a bit sloppy. And although a person might not go, oh, that's because this alignment isn't perfect or that, whatever, it looks a little off. And even a non-designer will notice that it doesn't feel quite right. So it's super important to get all of your alignments nice and tidy. All right, that's looking pretty good. So now what I would do here is I would select this thing and I would drag it out a little teeny bit. And then scoot it over and notice that it's not quite right. Again, we have a Y at the end of that name, so it may not look quite right. Notice this is a little teeny bit off. I'm using my arrow keys to nudge things around. See how it feels a little more aligned here rather than being perfectly correct. Okay. This is another reason not to use those smart guides. Those smart guides do not allow perfect alignment. It'll get things close, but it's not quite right. All right, let me zoom back out on this a minute. And we'll take a look at this a little bit more. Let me turn off the guides because they're getting in the way. And as I look at this, notice that even though the Mary is aligned well with the top of the N, this rule that I've just added, which is also at the same alignment as the end of the Y in the 1, 2, 3 address, it doesn't look right, does it? So what I would do now is I would select these elements, I would turn on my guides, and I would scoot these elements up so that the rule aligns with the top of the M. Because I've added this element, it makes it way stronger. Okay? Now notice how much tighter that looks. Okay? So then I can look at this and I can start looking around and going, well, I don't know, that phone number's starting to float a little bit. Turn my guides back on and maybe the number needs to be down and aligned with the top of the 123 South Main Street. Okay? Turn off my guides. Looks a little bit better. So another thing I might start looking at as I start tightening everything up here is I might look at the text, and I might look at different things like, okay, text is locked down. I might look at like color at this point in the game. Everything's black, but I've got some colors in the logo that I might want to pick up. So I might select an object and then maybe pick up my my pointer and then maybe change that to a gray. Might work. I don't know. Let's sort of see what that looks like. Well, it might be okay. And then maybe I'll pick this element and pick up my eyedropper and maybe pick up the dark yellow and see what that looks like. And I think this thing has a stroke on it. No, okay, it's good. All right. Now, I don't know if that makes a huge difference or if it's an improvement. Personally, I'm not sure it is. So I might undo that color there, but I think the gray might work. However, the gray might be a little bit too light, right? But it doesn't matter because what the weight of the text doesn't hold down the value of the color as much as this big mass of M, correct? So I would feel free to go in and beef up the gray a little bit, make it look more make it look a little bit more similar or even identical or in repetition of color, remember? That seems a bit dark to me, so I would probably just undo that. And this feels more about right, okay? So those are things to think about as well. And anything else? No, I think, the idea is I want you to the idea is I want you to think about using color in your text as well. It doesn't have to all be black, okay? The other thing to think about is text size hierarchy. Your name probably wants to be the most important thing. So you might consider making it bold. You might even consider making one word bold and one word regular. Provide a little bit of contrast, right? So as we begin to think about the concepts that we've been learning the entire time, things like similarity, contrast, anomaly, and so on, you can see how these elements now start to work in a much more refined and subtle manner. Like the color in the pencil is a color anomaly. The color in the M and in the name is either a similarity or the colors in repetition. Okay, we have contrast in size between the McMurray and the illustration. We have contrast in weight between the light and the bold. So you can see that we are using the same exact concepts all the way through that we've been learning from the very, very beginning. So I need you to continue to think about that as you begin to play around with these elements. They don't go away just because we're now working with real graphic type and images. All right, so that's the process. So I would save this now, and then I would start playing around with other options. I'd move the logo first and then see what happens. I would turn the format vertically and see what happens. I would, vertically actually might work kind of cool with this logo. This logo also doesn't have to be the way it is. It can, just because the pencil bleeds doesn't necessarily mean that's the best place for it. I might look for another opportunity. Very slight change, but in this situation, when you're dealing with a business card, small differences can make a really, really big deal. So explore different places. Make it on the right, make it low, bleed it off, put it in a corner, make it bigger or smaller. How big does the logo need to be before it doesn't work anymore? Okay? So those are different kinds of things. And every time you make a change in the logo, play with the type and then save it as a variation, okay? So it's important to just think about, at this point in time, don't tweak things too much just yet. We'll work on the tweaking at the next phase. What I want you to do at this point is to simply do a layout and be done with that layout. Then do a different layout and rework the type and save that. Don't play around too much with fussing with moving the illustration around or whatever the other stuff is. Just do a layout, save it. Move the logo, do a layout, save it. Move the logo, do a layout, save it, okay? And then we'll work on, okay, this is the one that has the best potential, do this, okay? So that's the business card part of this project, okay? So this is fun. Layout is a blast. So have some fun with this, and we'll see what you can do. Okay.